The studio went completely silent. Dr. Phil stood frozen in the center of the stage, holding a manila envelope in his hands. His face, usually composed and measured, showed something rare, genuine shock. The father sitting in the leather chair had just spoken 7 words that changed everything. The audience leaned forward, some with hands over their mouths. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone knew this was no longer just another episode. This was the moment a family's entire foundation cracked open. And inside that envelope Dr. Phil held was the proof of a secret that had lived in the shadows for 40 years. How did it come to this? How does a man hide something so profound from the people he loves most? And why, after all these years, did he finally decide to speak? To understand what happened in that studio, we have to go back 3 weeks earlier, to a phone call that would set everything in motion. Robert Miller was 62 years old. He lived in a quiet suburb outside Denver, married to his high school sweetheart Linda for 41 years. They had 2 children, Sarah, 38, a schoolteacher with 2 kids of her own, and Michael, 35, an accountant who had just gotten engaged. To everyone who knew them, the Millers were the picture of stability. Robert had worked at the same manufacturing company for 37 years. Linda volunteered at the church. They hosted Thanksgiving every year. They were, by all appearances, ordinary. Safe. Predictable. But Robert carried something inside him that was eating him alive. And it had been doing so since 1983. It started with headaches. Then sleepless nights. Then panic attacks that would hit him in the middle of grocery store aisles, leaving him gripping the shopping cart like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Linda noticed. She asked if he was okay. He smiled and said he was fine. He always said he was fine. But he wasn't fine. And he knew that if he didn't speak soon, he would take his secret to the grave. So one night, after Linda went to bed, Robert sat at the kitchen table and wrote an email to the Dr. Phil show. He didn't expect a response. He thought maybe just writing it down would help. But 3 days later, a producer called. And 2 weeks after that, Robert, Linda, Sarah, and Michael were sitting in a green room in Los Angeles, waiting to walk onto a stage in front of millions of people. None of them knew what Robert was about to say. He had only told the producers one thing. I need Dr. Phil's help. I can't carry this anymore. The taping began like most episodes. Dr. Phil walked out to applause, greeted the audience, and introduced the family. He explained that Robert had reached out because he needed to tell his family something he'd been hiding for decades. The family sat together on one side of the stage. Robert sat alone on the other. Dr. Phil positioned himself in the middle, as he always did, the mediator between truth and consequence. Robert, Dr. Phil began, his voice calm but firm. You told our producers that you've been living with a secret for over 40 years. A secret that has affected every single day of your life. Is that correct? Robert nodded. His hands were shaking. He wouldn't look at his family. And you've never told Linda? Never told your children? No, sir. Dr. Phil paused. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on Robert. Why now? Robert's voice cracked. Because I'm dying. The room froze. No one moved. Dr. Phil's expression shifted. This was no longer a conversation. This was a confession. Linda gasped. Sarah grabbed her mother's hand. Michael stood up halfway, then sat back down, stunned. Dr. Phil raised his hand gently, signaling everyone to stay seated. What do you mean you're dying? Dr. Phil asked. I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Robert said quietly. They gave me 6 months. Maybe less. The audience murmured. Dr. Phil nodded slowly, processing. He had seen a lot in his years on television, but this was different. This wasn't about blame or confrontation. This was about a man trying to set something right before he ran out of time. And this secret, Dr. Phil continued, his tone softer now, is something you feel you need to reveal before you go. Yes. Even though it might hurt them. Robert's eyes filled with tears. Especially because it might hurt them. They deserve to know the truth. Dr. Phil looked at Linda, then at Sarah and Michael. Their faces were a mix of confusion, fear, and love. They didn't know what was coming, but they could feel it in the air. Something enormous. Something irreversible. "All right," Dr. Phil said. "We're here. We're listening. Tell them." Robert took a deep breath. He finally looked at his wife. "Linda, I need you to know that I love you. I have loved you since we were 16 years old. Nothing I'm about to say changes that." Linda's face was pale. "Robert, what is this?" He turned to his children. "Sarah. Michael. You are my world. You always have been. But there's something I should have told you a long time ago. And I didn't. Because I was a coward." Dr. Phil remained still, watching. He didn't interrupt. He knew this moment belonged to Robert. "In 1983, Robert began, his voice trembling. "Before Sarah was born, Linda and I were going through a rough time. We were young. We didn't know how to handle money. We fought a lot. One night I walked out. I told her I needed space. I went to a bar. And I met someone." Linda closed her eyes. She already knew where this was going. "I had an affair," Robert said. "It lasted 3 months. And when it ended, I thought that was it. I thought I could bury it and move on. But 2 years later, I got a letter. The woman I had been with had a child. A son. And he was mine." The studio went dead silent. Sarah's mouth fell open. Michael looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Linda sat perfectly still, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Phil didn't move. He let the weight of the moment settle. Then, quietly, he asked, "Did you ever meet him?" Robert nodded. "Once. When he was 5. She reached out and asked if I wanted to see him. I went. I held him. And then I left. I told her I couldn't be part of his life. I sent money every month through a lawyer. But I never saw him again." "Why?" Dr. Phil's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Not judgment. Just clarity. "Because I was terrified," Robert said. "Terrified that if Linda found out, she'd leave me. Terrified that if Sarah and Michael knew, they'd hate me. So I buried it. I pretended it didn't exist. And I've been pretending ever since." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil stood up. He walked slowly across the stage, his hands clasped behind his back. The audience was completely silent. Even the crew had stopped moving. "Robert," Dr. Phil said, turning to face him, "you said you sent money every month. That means you knew where he was. You knew his name. You knew how to reach him." "Yes." "And you chose not to." Robert's face crumpled. "Yes." Dr. Phil looked at Linda. "Did you have any idea?" She shook her head, barely able to speak. "No. I thought we were okay. I thought we got through that time." Dr. Phil turned to Sarah and Michael. "How are you two processing this?" Sarah was crying. "I don't even know what to feel. I have a brother? A brother I've never met? And Dad just decided we didn't deserve to know?" Michael's voice was tight with anger. "How could you do that? How could you lie to us for 40 years? Robert didn't have an answer. He just sat there, broken. Dr. Phil walked back to the center of the stage. He stood between Robert and his family, a physical representation of the distance that had been created. And then he did something unexpected. He looked directly into the camera. "Stop the tape," he said. The crew hesitated. Dr. Phil repeated it, firmer this time. "Stop the tape." The cameras kept rolling, but everyone understood. This was no longer scripted. This was real. Dr. Phil turned to Robert. "You came here because you're dying, and you wanted to clear your conscience. But let me ask you something. Is this about them? Or is this about you?" Robert looked up, confused. "I don't understand." "You've carried this secret for 40 years," Dr. Phil said. And now, with 6 months left, you decide to unload it on them. They don't get time to process. They don't get time to be angry. Because you're dying, and they have to forgive you, right? Because what kind of person stays mad at a dying man? The words hit like a hammer. Robert's face went white. Linda covered her mouth. Sarah and Michael looked at each other, realizing what Dr. Phil was saying. I didn't mean it like that, Robert stammered. Maybe not consciously, Dr. Phil said. But that's what you're doing. You're putting the burden of forgiveness on them in the worst possible circumstances. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Dr. Phil reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. He held it up so everyone could see it. Robert, he said, before you came on this show, our team did some research. We wanted to understand the full story. And we found something. Robert's face went pale. What do you mean? Dr. Phil opened the envelope and pulled out a single photograph. He held it so only Robert could see it at first. Robert's hands flew to his face. He started to sob. Who is that? Linda asked, her voice shaking. Dr. Phil turned the photograph around. It showed a young man, maybe 37 or 38 years old, standing in front of a house. He had Robert's eyes. Robert's nose. There was no mistaking it. This, Dr. Phil said, is your son. His name is Daniel. And he's here. The studio erupted. The family turned toward the wings of the stage. And then, slowly, a man walked out. He was tall, with dark hair and a nervous expression. He didn't look at Robert at first. He looked at Linda. Then at Sarah. Then at Michael. Hi, he said quietly. I'm Daniel. Sarah stood up. She walked toward him, tears streaming down her face. You're my brother? I guess so, Daniel said, his voice breaking. She hugged him. Michael joined them. The three of them stood together, holding each other, while Robert sat in his chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Dr. Phil turned to Linda. Did you know we were bringing him? She shook her head, crying. No. Daniel reached out to us after Robert contacted the show, Dr. Phil explained. He said he'd been trying to find his father for years. And when he heard Robert was going to be here, he wanted to meet him. But more than that, he wanted to meet his family. Daniel walked over to Linda. I don't want to intrude, he said. I just wanted you to know I exist. I wanted to meet my siblings. I don't expect anything from anyone. Linda stood up. She looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then she hugged him. You're not intruding, she whispered. Your family. Dr. Phil turned to Robert. You thought you were protecting them by keeping this secret. But all you did was rob them of 40 years with their brother. And you robbed Daniel of a family. Robert couldn't speak. He just nodded. Dr. Phil walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. But here's the thing, Robert. You still have time. Not much. But enough. Enough to start fixing this. Enough to let them know the truth. And enough to let Daniel in. He turned to the family. This is going to be hard. For all of you. But you have something now that you didn't have before. You have the truth. And you have each other. What you do with that is up to you. Sarah, Michael, and Daniel were still standing together. Linda walked over and joined them. Robert stood up slowly, hesitant. He didn't know if they would let him in. But Sarah reached out her hand. Come here, Dad. Robert walked over. And for the first time in 40 years, the whole family stood together. The audience rose to their feet. The applause was deafening. Dr. Phil stepped back, watching. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. After the cameras stopped rolling, Dr. Phil sat with the family in a private room backstage. He connected them with a family therapist who specialized in complex grief and reconciliation. He arranged for Daniel to stay in Los Angeles for a few extra days so they could spend time together. And he made sure Robert had access to grief counseling, not just for himself, but for what his family was about to go through. 3 months later, Dr. Phil received a letter. It was from Sarah. She wrote that her father had passed away 2 weeks earlier. But before he did, he had spent every day with Daniel. They talked. They cried. They made up for lost time as best they could. And when Robert died, Daniel was there, holding his hand, alongside Linda, Sarah, and Michael. The letter ended with a single sentence. "Thank you for giving us the truth. Even though it hurt, we needed it." Dr. Phil kept that letter in his desk. He looked at it sometimes when the work felt heavy. Because it reminded him why he did what he did. Not for the drama. Not for the ratings. But for moments like that. Moments when the truth, no matter how painful, set people free. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The manila envelope Dr. Phil held that day was more than paper. It was proof that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, eventually demand to be told. And sometimes, the truth doesn't destroy a family. It saves one.